Hello and welcome to my course on the Attack Champion's Guide. This is going to be a marvelous adventure and it's going to help to turn you into an amazing attacker. And to help you do that, we're going to have a lot of games from Mihai Tal, one of the legends of attacking in chess. And of course, we're going to have Garry Kasparov and Magnus Carlsen. So we're going to be focusing on these three legends of the attack. And we're going to see all sorts of attack. We're going to see attacking on the king side, attacking on the queen side, attacking in the center, attacking strategical points. And when you learn how to combine all of these types of attack and the formulas that I'm going to show you, it's going to be very easy for you to become an excellent attacker. Now, of course, my name is FIDE Master Charlie Storey. I was the ex-England international team coach, including the under-16 Olympic team coach. And I've got a lot of experience of teaching highly talented players how to become better players. And attack is one of the most interesting types of play that you can do. So what does it take to become a good attacker? Well, I've got some incredible shortcuts for you to make it easy for you to do that. We're going to be learning some very interesting things. We're going to be learning about color coding of the pieces in the opening, middle, and end game. We're going to be learning about pizza pawn scale. We're going to be learning about unsuccessful attacks and successful attacks. We're going to be learning about aggressive posturing before your attack. We're going to be talking about the opening choice for the attack. We're going to be looking at successful ways to ensure that your attacks almost always go right, using what I call the 9-point rule against an exposed king. Very, very useful way to attack. Okay, so my little shortcuts going to make a big difference in your game. So now we're going to have a quick chat about some of these things in this introduction. So our first game here is Mihai Tal versus Sachik from 1988. Of course, Mihai Tal was arguably one of the best attackers of all time. So we're going to start off looking at a few of his games. Now, all of the games that I'm presenting to you are from White's viewpoint, and that's a very important reason why we're doing that. Now, for Black to attack, it's very difficult. It means White has to play poorly if Black is going to get some good attacking prospects. So we're going to focus on White throughout the whole of this course because tempos are very important, and White obviously gets a chance to increase their tempos. So let's have a look what happens here at the start of this game. Obviously, it's a Sicilian defense. And the first thing I want to show you here is the pawn color coding. So there's two types of color coding in chess. There's pawns and there's piece color coding. So let's start off with a pawn color coding here. So every pawn that starts on its original square is red. Now, the further up the board it advances, the more it increases in its own little power. And that can go in the color coding system that we're going to use, which is like traffic lights, red, yellow, and green. And one more, purple. So red, yellow, green, and purple. Red being the worst a piece can be. Yellow, the next step up. And then green, and then purple. So it's just simply 4 different grades on a pawn, on a piece or a pawn. But we're starting with the pawns here. And I've already color coded them there. You can see the red ones, which is fairly straightforward. They're on the starting squares. The yellow ones have moved 1 square. The green ones are in the center. Now, when a pawn advances across the center, I call that purple 1, purple 2, purple 3, and purple 4. Slightly different shades. Now, as you get really good at chess, when you eventually become a master or close to it, you can actually use shades of these colors. But for now, I just want to introduce you to how pawns slightly increase as they move forwards. So Tal played f4, pawn played a6, playing a version of the Sicilian Najdorf now. Now, when you are an attacking player, such as Mihai Tal, you want to play aggressively as much as you can, but also you want to play creatively. And there's a very creative move here that Tal plays, which is a3. Now, most of you here will be thinking, what kind of move is this? It's touching a wing pawn. It's not developing a piece. And he's hanging the piece on d4. What kind of player is this Mihai Tal? Is he some sort of magician? Well, obviously, if queen takes d4 here, bishop e3 would win the queen. So he probably doesn't want to take that knight just yet. Knight c6, knight to b3, queen c7, and bishop d3, bishop e7. Standard development stuff here. Bishop d2. And I'm just going to move it on to our next learning moment. White here has completed development. Black hasn't. We're going to talk about this in a second. Takes, and now. So we looked at the color coding for the pawns. Now this is a different type of color coding. This is the color coding of the pieces. Now, why is the color coding of the pieces important? Now, as a very experienced and very successful coach, having coached many of the top kids in the UK to become champions in their age groups and to go on to become chess masters, one of the easy ways to improve is to use color coding of all of your pieces. So I've color coded them here correctly from my definition and understanding. It's a little bit subjective, but there's not much argument actually on the different color codings. So we're going again from red to yellow to green to purple. Now, what's going on here? Well, I'm going to talk about all of White's pieces first. So White's pieces, they don't have any red pieces. In other words, they don't have any pieces which are not controlling many good squares. If you compare that with Black's pieces, I should probably put another red one in there. That rook on a8. If you compare that with Black's pieces, we can see that clearly Black has quite a lot of red pieces. Now, a color coding disadvantage of one color is the equivalent of a tempo in terms of the battle. Now, one of the easiest ways to understand the most important rule in chess, which is the platinum rule, which I'm now going to define. I'm going to say it twice so you understand it. The platinum rule. Superior team activity compared to the opponent's team activity. I'm going to say it again, it's so important. The platinum rule. Superior team activity compared to the opponent's team activity. Now, that platinum rule applies in the opening, it applies in the middle game, it applies in the end game. It's the most important rule in chess. If your pieces are superior in team activity to your opponents, not only does it help to keep your king safe, it helps you to possibly attack in the main important areas of the board, which we're going to see throughout this course. Number one, the attack on the king. Number two, the attack in the center. Number three, attack on weak squares. And all of these potential attacks also assist in your defense of your king. Obviously, if you are attacking, you're defending your king, because they have to respond to your attacks. So here's the color coding to help you with the platinum rule. If we count up the color codings, we can see there's four pieces which are green for white. There's only one green for black, which is his king, actually. The king gets it's slightly different in the color coding, but still important to note. The king is green and white's king is just yellow. That means when you're looking at the immediacy safety and the potential safety of the king, you calculate it. So in this instance, black's king is actually slightly safer because it has more protection pawn cover around it. And you're going to see that pawn cover is very important when it comes to attacking the king, which we'll see throughout the games of Tal, Carlsen, and Kasparov. So, does white have an advantage in color coding? Well, yes, he does. In fact, we can actually count up how many color coding tempos white is ahead of black. Now, I'm going to do that now, but first, I'm going to simplify first. So we have, looking at the yellows, there's 3 yellows for white: knight, bishop, and king. So I'm going to cancel out 3 of the yellows, so that's equal. Next up, we're going to add up 2 of black's yellows against 2 of white's greens. So if we do that, we can see it's +2 for white. We're going to cancel out one of the other greens for green. So that is still +2 for white. White still has 2 greens left. We're going to use those 2 greens against the 2 reds. That's another 2 tempos. So that's +4 tempos that we can see there. Now, I've also color-coded the central pawns. You'll notice I haven't color-coded the wing pawns or the supporting central pawns. Now, central pawns are very important. They're worth approximately 1.5 pawns compared to a rook's pawn, which is worth quarter of a pawn, or a knight's pawn worth half a pawn, or a bishop's pawn, which is worth 1 pawn. Anyway, you're going to learn more and more about the color coding of the pawns and the pieces as we go through this, and we're going to see clear examples, and you're going to agree and disagree, but mainly you'll agree with the color coding. You will eventually change it slightly to suit yourself and your own sort of style, or maybe the level that you're playing at. Obviously, somebody who's playing at a 1600 level is different to somebody who's playing at a 2000 level, which is different to a 2400 level, which is different to a 2800 level. But the color coding principle is so important. If you are not using it, you are basically at a massive disadvantage compared to those that are using it. So, back to this position. This is the start of Mihai Tal attacking. And he's just put his knight into d5. It looks stupid. It looks like he's giving up a piece. Let's see what happens. So always, when you're analyzing a situation, you always start with the acceptance of the piece. So white attacks this knight. Now in the game, bishop g4 was played, but that's not so instructive. Most players here would be like, what is white doing? They've sacrificed a piece, and I'm just going to move the knight, and I am a piece up. Now, before you understand color coding, that would be your perfectly natural choice. And you think, as most beginners to intermediate players who candidate masters, they're very materialistic. They love their material. They can see it. They can touch it. They know that they're ahead. But no. We're going to move away from materialism, and we're going to go into the dynamics, almost like the spiritual realm of chess. And this is where Mihai Tal resided when he came to being such a brilliant chess player. So I've color-coded this position now. Now, I'm going to tell you a very good shortcut now, a shortcut formula. And that is, if I said to you, you can have 2 tempos or a pawn, what would you choose? 1 pawn equals £1 million. Do you want the pawn? Or would you rather have the 2 tempos? Now, a tempo is like a move. It's like having 2 extra moves. Or 2 tempos is like having 2 extra moves. In battlefield terms, it's like having an extra day to get your troops into position, whereas the opposing army hasn't had a chance to get their troops into position. So what would you rather have? £2 million or your troops 2 days ahead of the opponent's troops in terms of getting into battle? Well, the correct answer is 2 tempos is better than a pawn. So some slight argument over whether a central pawn is worth 2 tempos, but generally it is. Now, the distinction of doing this for white compared to doing it versus black is very important. Because when you're white, already having an extra tempo and then you gain 2 tempos is exponential increase in the chances of you getting your attacks working. If you're black and you gain 2 tempos, well, you're only going to be a tempo up at the end of it, so maybe it's not worth a pawn. And this is why it's so hard for black to actually conduct good attacks against good players. When black is starting a tempo down, it's very difficult. The platinum rule is always in white's favor if white's playing well. That's just the way it is in chess at a high level. So the question is, can you understand the platinum rule? Can you understand the color coding? Can you understand the fact pawns increase slightly in power as they advance up the board. And if you can do all of that, then we're setting the foundations for you to be able to attack, like Mihai Tal, like Magnus Carlsen, and like Gary Kasparov, and like Charlie Storey, dare I say it. So that's that. Now I just want to go back to Tal's game here. And now Tal here is a piece down, but he, well, in this variation, he would have been a piece down. But his opponent didn't fancy that. His opponent was a grandmaster in his own right. And instead of playing knight d8, he played bishop g4. So bishop g4, it means we're going to get the piece back now, because after queen g3, his opponent played knight d5, and Tal got the piece back immediately. So his opponent was aware of all of this potential suppression that he would have got for his piece for 2 pawns. Let me just take you back to knight d8 a second. So after knight d8, then what white would have done here, he would have taken on b4. And here, this is where Tal would have had his piece for 2 pawns. But more than that, he would have some great factors going on. He would have, for example, he could at some point play c4. And that would really grip down in the center, which would make black's pieces even more stuck. And when this grip on c4 comes, white would be able to increase their power with a very powerful kingside attack, and black's pieces would have disappeared from the location sector of the black king. So that is the reason his opponent didn't want to play passively. So if we go back to the game again, after bishop g4, queen g3, knight takes d5, queen g4. Now Tal has managed to get his pieces back. After knight f6, queen h3, we can see that he now has something very important, which we're going to discuss quite a lot throughout this course, which is the bishop pair and the advantages of the bishop pair. And I'm going to explain very clearly when the bishop pair is good and when it's not as good. In fact, sometimes the knight pair is better than the bishop pair, but we're going to discuss that as well in some detail throughout this course. Now, back to this game. Let's just show you what happened. After d5, a4, rook a8, king h1. We're going to discuss as well throughout this course why humans don't defend very well. Why does a human being not defend very well versus stockfish, for example? When stockfish is defending, it's easy. It takes a second and it finds the best route and the best path. Now, human beings, they can attack well, but when it comes to defending, they cannot match, not even close to the power of what, for example, what stockfish can do. And why is that? Well, there's a natural tendency among juniors, which echoes into adulthood, that they like to attack. They like to go forwards. But there is moments when you have to stop doing that and you have to focus on the defense. And this is not natural to human chess players. So we're going to discuss that as well. Now back to this game. In the game, black, we should have got ready to defend correctly. Didn't. They played a5, which wasn't the best move. It was a small mistake. It's not developing a piece. Now, when you're being attacked or about to be attacked, you've got to get your pieces into the game fast in readiness to defend. And touching wing pawns is a mistake, which we'll discuss a bit more at length throughout the course. Queen f3. Now we're going to look at how to use the bishop pair. This here is the correct bishop pair technique. It is to put the queen on the light square and then attack on the light squares, because black doesn't have a light squared bishop. And this is one of the key fundamentals of how to play with the bishop pair. Now, this is just the introduction game, so I'm going to go through it a little bit more quickly than I normally would. So, and now c4 is played. This is pressurizing on the light squares. If he takes, the bishop is now coming and exercising its power at f6 and h7. Now, the grandmaster that Tal was playing did a fair trade. Now, something that's very important in terms of fighting for the platinum rule, and I'm going to repeat this 2 times so you understand it. Never start a fair trade unless you have an excellent reason. I'm going to say that again. Never start a fair trade unless you have an excellent reason. Now, what that means is, if we just take this back here, black here has a possibility of doing a fair trade, rook takes rook. Now, let's see what happens after rook takes rook and rook takes rook. Now, if we compare the two rooks, we can see one is active and the other one is defensive. So normally what happens when you start a fair trade is the piece that has just recaptured, in this case the white rook, has increased its power for free. In other words, its color coding has gone up a little bit. Now, sometimes there is an excellent reason, and the most obvious excellent reason to start a fair trade is if you, in fact, gain a tempo somehow. But if you're not gaining a tempo, normally you do not want to be the one that starts a fair trade. So after bishop b4, here, black was hoping that there would be an exchange of pieces on b4, and then black would have a lovely position. But now Mihai Tal, he knows something. I'm not sure what he called it back there, but I have created a formula that works for an attack on the king. Now, when the king has broken pawn cover, or it only has two pawns covering it, or just one pawn covering, there is something called a 9-point attacking rule, which means your attack will work. So let's just get crack on with the game and I'll explain that. So bishop f6, bishop takes rook. Now if we just take that back and we look at pawn takes f6 here. Now if this happened at this point, the king is exposed. In other words, its pawn cover has enabled white to be able to attack it. The pawn cover has been damaged, and that means there's a possibility of a 9-point rule. A 9-point rule is when 9 units of material, like 9 bees, can swarm around the king and sting it. Or in other words, a 9-point rule should enable a successful attack onto the black king. So that's what you're going to learn. So throughout this course, let me summarize. You're going to learn the 9-point rule. You're going to learn color coding. You're going to learn pawn color coding. You're going to learn how to attack the center, the king on the king side, the king on the queen side, certain squares on the queen side when there's no attack on. You're going to see when it works, attacks, when it doesn't work, and you're going to see the masters of attack in action. And I'm going to be your presenter throughout the course, Charlie Storey, VD Master, and I'm looking forward to turning you into attacking experts.